Welcome to The Explainer. I want you to just take a second and picture your dinner table right now. Sitting right there, probably right next to the pepper, is a small, completely unassuming shaker of salt. Today, it's just a cheap condiment, right? We hardly give it a second thought. But what if I told you that those little white crystals actually represent the most powerful, transformative, and hotly contested currency in all of human history?
Think about the literal foundations of our modern world. I want to pose a pretty massive historical question to you. What single commodity built the infrastructure of the Roman Empire, funded the absolutely breathtaking architecture of Venice, and directly forced the invention of paper money?
The answer is salt. That cheap, everyday seasoning you sprinkle on your fries was the original engine of global economics. We're talking about a wild story full of ancient empires, grueling labor, extreme environments, and just immense wealth.
Part 1. The ultimate store of value.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand how salt became money, we kind of have to rewind the clock about 10,000 years, right back to the dawn of agriculture. You see, before anything can be a currency, it has to have an intrinsic value that everyone, everywhere, universally agrees upon. And for salt, that value came straight from our own biology. Let's compare it to what we traditionally think of as wealth, right? Gold. Gold is shiny, sure, but it has absolutely zero biological utility. You literally cannot eat it to survive. Salt, on the other hand, is a biological necessity. Human and animal bodies strictly require sodium chloride to live. So when humans shifted from hunting to farming 10,000 years ago, our diets actually lost naturally occurring sodium, so we actively had to go out and seek it. But even beyond our biology, salt was a miracle technology. In a world before refrigerators, salt wasn't a seasoning. It was literally the only reliable way to preserve meat, fish, and cheese so you could survive the harsh winters. It had absolute utility, and if you lived inland, absolute scarcity. It was truly white gold.
Section 2. When salt was money.
So let's see how this builds into microeconomics. Because salt was universally required for survival, it didn't just have value, it actually became the standard measure of value itself. It evolved from a basic nutrient into actual physical currency used by some of the most powerful empires in history. I mean, look no further than ancient Rome. Roman infantry soldiers weren't just paid in coins, they were literally paid in salt, or at least given a specific allowance to buy it. This payment was known as the salarium argentum. Now, if that sounds a little familiar, it definitely should. This Roman practice is the exact root of the modern English word salary. It's also where we get the phrase worth your salt, meaning you're a dependable, hard-working employee. The Romans even built one of their oldest roads, the Via Salaria, around 600 BC specifically to transport salt from the coastal Tiber marshes deep into the inland territories. The infrastructure of the empire was practically paved with salt.
But creating a salt currency wasn't always as simple as, collecting it from a nice coastal marsh. Sometimes it required brutal, unimaginable labor. Let me draw your attention to this number, 130. That is how many meters below sea level the Danakil Depression sits in Ethiopia. It is a blisteringly hot, incredibly inhospitable wasteland. It's widely considered one of the most extreme environments on Earth.
For over 1,500 years, going all the way back to the ancient kingdom of Aksum around 525 AD, teams of miners would endure the insane heat of the Danakil Depression to crack open the salt plains. They carved the salt into uniform, 1-pound blocks called amuls. And to protect this really precious currency on the long journey up to the highlands, they wrapped the blocks super carefully in wood shavings and leaves. These amuls were the primary physical currency across Ethiopia and parts of Black Africa literally up until the mid-20th century. You could use them to buy everyday items, pay your taxes, and settle debts. The immense, grueling human labor required to mine and transport these blocks is exactly what gave this physical ledger its deeply trusted value.
Section 3. Empires of the Desert. We've seen how salt paid individual soldiers and miners, but let's zoom out to the macroeconomics. Salt didn't just facilitate local trade, it built entire transcontinental empires. Welcome to the legendary trans-Saharan trade network. Between the 8th and 16th centuries, the Sahara Desert was the ultimate highway of wealth, and the scale of this was just staggering. Berber traders organized these massive caravans to cross the scorching, unforgiving sands. Just imagine standing in the desert and watching a single caravan of up to 10,000 camels stretching all the way across the horizon. And what were they carrying that was worth risking their lives in the Sahara? Giant slabs of salt, mined from places like Tagaza and Taudendini, heading south.
They were heading south to West Africa, where the economic reality was completely flipped. Down in West Africa, gold dust was actually abundant. But gold, as we established earlier, cannot keep you alive. Salt, however, was incredibly scarce there and absolutely vital for survival in the heat. Because of this extreme supply and demand dynamic, salt slabs traded evenly with gold dust, ounce for ounce. Just let that sink in for a second. A pound of salt was literally worth its weight in solid gold.
The incredible wealth of the great West African empires, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, wasn't built just by digging gold out of the ground. It was built by controlling and taxing the salt trade. Every single slab of salt that entered their territory was heavily taxed. This salt-driven economy generated so much wealth for the state that when Mansa Musa, the ruler of Mali, made his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he flooded the city of Cairo with so much gold that he temporarily crashed the entire regional economy. And it was all funded by a monopoly on salt.
Section 4. Venice and Modern Finance. And this brilliantly illustrates how controlling the flow of salt was the ultimate geopolitical power move. In fact, it laid the literal blueprint for modern banking and state finance. Let's look at the Republic of Venice, founded in the 6th century in a series of lagoon salt marshes. Now, what made Venice a global superpower wasn't just harvesting salt, it was their absolute mastery of the market. In 1281, Venice enacted the Ordo Salis, the Salt Rule. This law required all Venetian merchants to return to the city with their ship cargo beds completely packed full of salt, acting as ship ballast. The crazy thing is, Venice didn't even produce most of this salt themselves. Instead, they became a ruthless, highly organized middleman. They controlled saltworks all across the Mediterranean, suppressed independent competitors, and meticulously manipulated market prices.
So how did this commodity fuel massive state innovation? Well, let's compare Venice to its fierce rival, Genoa. For Venice, the immense profits managed by their salt magistracy directly funded the city's iconic marble palaces, public monuments, and their legendary shipbuilding center, the Arsenal. Meanwhile, Genoa, trying to get a piece of the pie, expanded their salt buying way out into the Black Sea and Ibiza. This highly capitalized, high-risk, high-reward salt trade acted as the real engine for Genoa's financial innovations. To protect all those salt shipments, Genoa spurred the creation of maritime insurance, early banking systems, and long-distance Atlantic shipping. So yeah, the sophisticated financial instruments we use today, they were basically born from the need to manage the Mediterranean salt trade.
Section 5. The birth of paper money. All right, we are now going to travel east to China to see the climax of salt's economic journey. We're going to look at the most profound financial abstraction in human history, and it's an invention directly caused by the logistics of the salt trade. For centuries, salt taxes, known as yanke, were an absolute pillar of traditional Chinese state revenue. It was their second largest revenue source, right behind land taxes. It was so absolutely crucial to dynastic survival that the state went to extreme lengths to protect it. The Northern Song dynasty, for example, actually built massive fortifications, including the aptly named Forbidden Wall, made of solid brick, all the way around the Yuncheng Salt Lake. They literally built a fortress around a lake just to prevent salt theft and smuggling. That is exactly how valuable this state monopoly was.
Let's trace how this escalated. It started way back in 119 BCE, when the Han dynasty established a strict state monopoly on salt to fund their military campaigns. Over centuries, through the Tang dynasty and the building of that Forbidden Wall, the state's reliance on salt revenue just kept growing. But by the Northern Song dynasty, there was a major logistical crisis. Buying huge quantities of state-monopolized salt required money, and at the time, money meant bronze and iron coins. The sheer physical weight of the thousands of metal coins needed to buy bulk salt was literally crushing the merchants in the Sichuan province. It was just way too heavy to carry. So, to solve the problem of buying salt, merchants developed deposit shops and started trading paper receipts instead of carrying the heavy coins. They called it flying cash. This system evolved directly into the world's very first state-backed paper currency. That's right, paper money exists today simply because salt was too heavy to buy with metal.
From the biological imperative of preserving food, to the Ethiopian amole blocks, to the gorgeous architectural wonders of Venice, and finally all the way to the very paper money we use today, salt drove it all. Which brings us to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with. Salt was the ultimate currency because it had absolute, undeniable, intrinsic biological value. You literally needed it to live. Now think about the fiat paper money or the plastic credit cards sitting in your wallet right now. They facilitate our entire modern world, but they lack that fundamental biological utility. Next time you pass the salt shaker at dinner, ask yourself, which currency holds the true power? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this completely changes how you view your next meal.